right, since President Trump's election in 2016, impeachment has been on the minds of some Democrats across the U.S. Former hedge fund manager turned billionaire activist Tom Steyer has become one of the loudest voices calling on lawmakers to oust the president from office. He's also spent millions gathering support. A recent story in New York Magazine detailed Steyer's efforts and describes why some Democrats are worried he may be playing right into President Trump's hands. I recently spoke with the author of that piece, Gabe Debenedetti, for Red and Blue. So this is such a fascinating portrait of a person who I think a lot of folks wouldn't necessarily recognize his name, Tom Steyer. Tell me, first of all, who he is and how he entered the political arena.
Well, Tom Steyer is this hedge fund manager who recently decided that he wanted to get into politics in the last 10 years or so. And over the last few election cycles, he's become the Democrats' largest donor by an enormous amount. And in fact, the biggest donor in all of politics. He spent nearly $200 million on races over the last few election cycles, but he's been pretty quiet about it. People don't really know his name. Now, however, he is, after considering running for office, thrown a ton of money into this impeachment push, and that's included television ads, doing town halls around the country, and he spent $40 million so far on ads that feature his face, basically making the case that Donald Trump should be impeached.
I mean, it's really sort of a dizzying amount of money when you look at it. And he says, Steyer says, that President Trump has met the criteria for impeachment. What does he say specifically the president has done to warrant that?
Well, he actually has a list of 8 different things that he says meet the criteria of impeachment, and that includes things like profiting from the presidency with the emoluments clause, collusion, obstruction of justice, but it also includes other things that have simply offended Steyer and people around him, like threatening the freedom of the press, things that, of course, could be impeachable because impeachment is, after all, essentially a political fight. But, of course, these are not necessarily things that are going to throw the president in prison or anything like that.
So it's interesting because he doesn't necessarily have the support of national Democrats. Talk to me a little bit about that conflict, that tension.
Yeah, in fact, he actively doesn't have the support of a lot of national Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, when he has gone out there and started to do this push, he got a lot of pushback from leaders of the party, including Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, who tried to call him and say, hey, this isn't exactly useful. You know, privately, he says to his friends, if they don't like it, that means I'm doing something right. Essentially, their argument, though, is it's too early to do this. We can't make impeachment look partisan because if it does happen, we need Republicans to come on board in order for it to actually occur. But most importantly, they look at the 2018 election cycle and they think that if we get out there as Democrats and talk about impeachment, yes, we will rile up the Democratic base, but we're also going to really energize Republicans. Even the ones who don't necessarily love Donald Trump, a lot of them don't want to see him impeached. And so what they're really worried about is really energizing the opposite side.
So what does Steyer say about those criticisms?
He basically says it's ridiculous and these people are standing in the way of progress. He likens his fight to the civil rights movement and says these are like people who stood in the way of civil rights activists saying, you know, we need to take some time with this. We need to be responsible. His argument is essentially if you're fighting about timing, you're having the wrong fight entirely.
I imagine there are probably some Republicans who are kind of quietly cheering him on because it gives them sort of ready-made campaign commercials.
And some not so quietly. A lot of them were pretty happy, for example, when he first ran one of his ads on Fox and Friends in a specific attempt to get the president to tweet back at him. And lo and behold, it worked. And then this turned into a national fight over whether or not the president should be impeached. And that's something that a lot of Democrats are torn over. But Republicans are pretty much on the one side that they don't want to impeach Donald Trump. So Republicans are certainly saying, hey, you know that Tom Steyer guy? You should listen to him.
Yeah, because the more that he's out there and the louder and more amplified his voice, the more Republicans can then present that as an argument to voters as to why Democrats shouldn't be voted into.
And that's certainly something that a lot of Republicans have started to try and do, including the president, who has recently at some of his rallies say, these Democrats are going to try to impeach me. Now, all of that said, Tom Steyer has gotten over 5 million people to sign on to this petition drive. So it's not as if he's out there sort of doing his own thing and hurting his own party. He is really riling up a lot of people in the Democratic Party that are pretty disillusioned with the party and really want to hear this kind of boldness. If you go to one of his town halls, it's not necessarily the kinds of people that you expect to see. So he is bringing new voters in, and he's essentially saying, if as a party we don't talk about impeachment, we're leaving all these voters out.
So where does this all leave not just party officials, but candidates themselves, you know, trying to navigate this?
Yeah, it's a really tough question for a lot of them, and the vast majority of them are not talking about impeachment on the campaign campaign trail. Now, some of them are in early stages of primaries, and it's especially in very liberal places, because these are the primaries where voters, Democratic voters, essentially just want to see someone who is as strong as possible against Donald Trump. But in other places, especially in battleground states or battleground territories where a Republican currently holds the seat and a Democrat's trying to take it, they never talk about impeachment, and in fact really don't like the question at all and are trying to dodge it. Basically, they're going to have to win over a number of voters that voted for Donald Trump, even if they regret it now, and those voters are unlikely to want to impeach him.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but really quickly, you write about how Republicans received backlash in 1998 for their impeachment efforts against President Clinton. What are the lessons for Democrats from that?
Well, Democrats know that they can't do what Republicans did last time, which is go overboard and really try and make this seem as partisan as possible. Yeah, I talked to a number of Republicans who said, if you look at what Bill Clinton did successfully in '98, he made it look as if Republicans were just going after him personally and not over policy. And now that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to say, you can't just impeach me because you don't like me. And of course, that's not what Democrats say they're trying to do, but here we are.
And is Steyer running in 2020, we think?
He says he hasn't ruled it out, but let's put it this way. You don't exactly send out polls to the early states of Iowa and New Hampshire unless you're looking at it.
All right. Gabe Debenedetti, I'm sure that you will stay on top of it. Thank you so much, Gabe. Really fascinating.